Hello, class, and welcome to week 10. Or maybe I should say farewell to English 023 because we are in the home stretch. And I hope you're all feeling it. We have gone through quite a semester. We have started with a study on systems of privilege with our Alan G. Johnson readings and our discussions of the sentence, all men are created equal from the Declaration of Independence, which Thomas Jefferson penned, into a discussion of modern day application of those principles. Are all people created equal, or at least are they treated equally in our country? And Alan G. Johnston talked about various systems of privilege, and his prime example was the white system of privilege in America, how certain advantages are given to the dominant group, and in dominant group we mean the group whose positions of power are mostly comprised of people from that, or the positions of power in America are traditionally consisted of dominantly people from that group. Doesn't mean everybody is in positions of power, but more positions of power from that group tend to be or are members of the dominant group. All right, so from there, we wrote an essay about the concepts that Amy Hunter brought up in her TED Talk about lucky zip codes and how those correlate with systems of privilege as well, including access to education and safe neighborhoods. So that essay was who gets to be lucky in our society and how could we make more people more lucky. So it's an interesting concept about luckiness and how we can do something about making more people more lucky. From that essay, we moved on to a different unit of study, and that was, as you recall, gender and identity, which included discussions of the biology of sex and the psychological informing of gender, and also sexual orientation that comes from those concepts as well, and how those have shifted over the years, and how they also entail systems of privilege themselves. And the Beverly Daniel Tatum article about the complexity of an identity, Who Am I, mentioned even more systems of privilege and how our identity tends to be comprised, she says, by how we differ from other people. So how we differ from the norm tends to be the characteristics of what form core identities in ourselves. For example, I am in my 50s, so that makes me somebody who's different from you all. So maybe that to me is part of my core identity when I'm in this class context, that I am not usually a peer, right, with the students I teach because I'm of an older generation. And so sometimes that can be an advantage, right? Depending on the context that I'm in. And other times it could be a disadvantage. So it really is the complexity of identity, right? Context makes a difference on how you identify yourself and how you are advantaged or disadvantaged. Tatum talked about 7 different systems of privilege that she saw going on in America. And there are more, of course, but she talked about main ones that she noticed. And they, you got religious ones, you've got ability ones, physical and mental both. As I mentioned, age, sexual orientation, and gender, and race, and ethnicity. There's even like educational systems of privilege. So yeah, it's a lot to think about, and it's complex for sure, and also controversial, right? A lot of controversy in these topics and these readings and videos that we've been watching, but it's all to get you to think, right, and to analyze the assumptions that we make as people and question the validity of those assumptions, and also to get you thinking about, can we do something to change some of these systems of privilege, because who wants to be the victim of a system of privilege, right? So from that unit, we wrote an essay on, that's essay 2, on gender and identity, and you were able to come up with your own essay question for that essay. So that was a little different because in essay 1, I provided the questions, and in essay 2, you provided your own, and then you came up with a thesis statement that answered that question. And from that unit, we moved on to what is race? That's our current unit. And we are writing essay 3 in conjunction with that unit of study, where we are analyzing how people think of race, how they define race. What is it? Is it something? We started with the Fuentes article on the myth of race. Actually, it's not an article, it's a chapter from a whole book he wrote. And in that chapter, as you recall, he discusses about the artificiality of race, of racial categories, that it's just not something that holds up to biology. You know, there's no biological definition of what makes a race. You can't analyze somebody's DNA code and say, hey, this person is this race and that person is that race, because there's so many similarities, you know, between somebody from one race. Like I would have maybe as much similarity from one person from a different race, and maybe even more so than I would with a perfect stranger on the street. So yeah, so the biological classification of race doesn't hold up. Other people define race maybe based on appearance, but then of course appearances vary so very much, right? You know, I told you about a friend of mine who is Native American, who's even, you know, paler than I am in color. So, you know, there are so many ambiguities there. You can't have any sort of definitive categorization based on appearance either. And then other people go to ethnicity, right, as a way to define race. So, you know, where are you from? Where were you born? Well, then you get all sorts of complexities there. What about somebody who, okay, my friend, I have another friend who was born in Africa. Yet she is as pale as I am, and her ancestors descend from I think the Netherlands and England, you know. So how do you categorize that based on ethnicity, right? She spent her whole life growing up in Africa, yet people wouldn't normally call her African. Yet she is. She is an African American, but she looks like me, you know, and ethnically she has ancestors from Europe. So very complex again. It reminds me of well, uh you might be too young to remember this. I don't you're not my age, right? Yeah, some of you could be, I suppose. But in 1950, South Africa actually it had instituted a policy of apartheid, and apartheid means apartness. Basically, it in 1950 came up with the Population Registration Act, in which it made all of its citizens register by race. They had to carry what you call pass cards, which would say what your race was on it, and based on what your race, you had to carry that pass card with you everywhere in the country to be able to do anything. You had, and the 4 main categories of race that they used for their Population Registration Act were Native, Black, Colored, and Indian. So those were the 4 races that they defined in their act. And we think, well, what on earth is that? They don't even really make sense, do they? So white meant anybody typically of European descent. Colored meant people of any sort of mixed races. In other words, different. Yeah, again, what is that, right? Because aren't we all mixed, right? Don't we all come from thousands and thousands and thousands of years of descent? Then we all start in the Fertile Crescent, right, in Africa? Isn't that where our first ancestors came from? So what is really mixed? We're all mixed, right? So it just all depends on how far you go back. Anyway, yeah, that's what they meant by colored. And then they had Indian as a category, and Indian was people that were from British India, the colony. Now it's called India, the country. But because South Africa was colonized by both Dutch settlers and British settlers, they had certain categories based on their old colonial systems. And then the native category was people who were born in Africa. So yeah, you think how on earth did they even define these people? And they sometimes, you know, if you go to like some of the museums and things like that in South Africa on apartheid and these past systems, you'll see that even members of the same family were categorized as different races. Yeah, because it's this is complex and it's artificial, these categorizations. If you've ever watched the Dave Chappelle show they have from years ago, they have a very interesting, he has a very interesting comedy sketch called The Racial Draft. Um, and that also brings up these artificialities of race categories and the absurdities that come from trying to categorize somebody by something as artificial as the concept of race. So it's an interesting watch, and it's food for thought for this essay 3, when you're writing about what is race, how do we define it in our society, um, and uh, what do we do about it, right? So as we go into this week, this final week, we're writing essay 3. The readings and the videos that we're basing essay 3 on are here in week 9. So you see, we have The Myth of Race by Agustin Fuentes, White Poverty by Bell Hooks, Racial Segregation in the United States by Wikipedia. So you can draw from these things as you know in your essay, and then we go over to the videos, which are more food for thought. We have housing segregation and redlining in America, and the HOLC map of Trenton, school segregation from Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, and a conversation with the police, uncomfortable conversations with a black man, episode 9 by Emmanuel Acho, who actually has a book that he wrote from this um, series of videos that he shot. And I believe it is called Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man. So you can look out for that one if you want to watch it. So let's head over to week 10. In week 10 this week to write your essay. That's what all of our activities are about. You will have a graphic organizer to help you use a visual tool to map out your essay. I've actually included tons of helps in the writing solutions folder and the writing organizer folder. There are like math exercises you could do to help you brainstorm if you'd like to do that. That's not a required exercise, but I put it there as a tool to help you think about the topic and generate ideas. I have organizers like outline that you can fill out, cluster maps, all things to help you take your thoughts, because usually our thoughts are like this, and organize them into a format that will translate into an essay. So I have the required activity of your filling out the graphic organizer based on your essay and turning that in, and that lays out all those basic essay components so that you make sure that your essay has them. You know, the introductory paragraph, the body paragraphs, you want to have at least 3, and the concluding paragraph. And then within those paragraphs, they also have their own components. You know, the introductory paragraph, for example, the hook, the context, and the thesis statement. And remember, the thesis statement is the answer to the essay question and implies some thesis points or controlling ideas that each body paragraph will then do. Body paragraphs, of course, you want to have your topic sentence that introduces the thesis point that particular body paragraph will develop. You want to have some sort of example that you're using to illustrate the point you're making. Usually that will be a quotation from one of our required sources. Those are all listed on the assignment. For essay 3, you have to have at least 3 quotations and at least 2 required sources from the week 9 readings, and they're all listed in these essay assignments. So you can look at that. And then you'll have to submit an essay draft, which is where I give you feedback on how you're doing, where you're going with it, and my suggestions for improvement. That'll be extremely helpful to help you take your essay 3 to the next level. Then finally, as you submit your essay 3, I have you submit a revision checklist where you answer this very specific questions on the revision checklist to make sure that your essay 3, in fact, has all the components it's supposed to. So hopefully that'll be a very useful tool. Those are the 4 assignments that you're being graded on this week. And then there's also, of course, the week 10 class. So if you didn't attend that, watch the video. All right. Good luck. Thanks. And I loved working with you guys.